What's it? So we're coming together again for another discussion between me and Dr. Weizfeld. I've got a collection of questions and other bits of discussionary topics that we're going to sift through, a lot of which to give a general understanding of whom Dr. Weizfeld is and just to understand the long history that exists to Weizfeld's experiences in regards to engaging in political struggle.
Yeah, there's too much.
Seems there's still more to keep adding to the list as well.
Yeah, I was starting to get worn out, but now my doctor is getting me all fixed up, so I'll be able to go for another 15 years.
A lot can happen in 15 years.
Thanks to the healthcare system in Canada. It was Tommy Douglas that brought about socialized medicine in Canada, from the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation. Good name. Then they changed to Social Democratic NDP, but that's another story.
There's only so far that these people are willing to give any dividends into the poor. As soon as it starts getting to a point where it don't suit them too much, they'll fly by the other wheel.
I don't know. The poor are expendable, like there's 8 million Canadians on a waiting list, for a surgical operation. I understand there's 6 million waiting in England, Britain, for some surgical procedure. And meanwhile, Britain is, like moving, like there's, practically a general strike, to get more funding for the public healthcare system. Here in Canada, no, we just suffer quietly while we freeze.
Saying please, thank you, and sorry, eh?
Yeah. Yeah, in both English and French.
It's like a blend of all the abuses of the Anglosphere, but they'll be nice to you while they do it.
Oh yes, very nice. Yeah. Polite, British politeness. Yes, it's something to see. Okay, what's your first question?
What firing it off from the get-go. What was it like growing up a refugee and a second-generation Holocaust survivor, especially in the West?
Wow. I didn't even know what I was, at first. At first, I was just, like my parents, who survived, and spoke to each other in Polish, and they spoke with me in Yiddish. And when I when I was switched to a public school system, I didn't know English, except for, American television, which I started to pick up in 1956. But, a year or two of American television, that's all I had, to go with, to start, the public school system after I switched, from the Jewish Orthodox, day school system, because my Canadian cousin said that my mother should do it. So I come into this school, hardly speaking any English, and they send me back to the grade 1, because that's, and they had nothing, to transition classes or nothing to teach new immigrants how to speak English or anything like that. No, you have to do it all on your own. And then I end up going to this primary school called King Edward school. Who's King Edward? King Edward was the guy in 1292 who expelled all the Jewish people from England. Okay, so I walk into this King Edward school, nobody talks to me, because one, the Christians, thought that the Jewish people were sort of, not to be friends with, and so nobody talked with me, and I didn't speak with any Christians, because, we were told, that the Christians were dangerous and were our enemy. So, I just went through there without just listening to teachers talk, basically, so started to concentrate, focusing on, what I could learn, and that was about it. Then what happens, grade 6, Mr. Gardner in our class, in the midst of, some scientific presentation, and when he got close to me on the side of the classroom, as if he was answering me when I had not said anything at all, in order to, make the students, the Christian students, feel better about the Holocaust, which everybody knew about. And he says, and the Jews killed Christian babies in the Middle Ages, just like that, like quick, and then goes on with the scientific thing, just to, okay, this is King Edward, like come to life again. And this,
it's so sick and twisted.
yeah. So, I mean, like, without even thinking about it, like I reacted automatically, spontaneously, stood up without permission, of course, pointed to the teacher and yelled, practically yelled. I don't know if I yelled, but anyway, I said, that's a lie. Okay. So like the whole class, just like froze, like complete, neurotic, trance for everybody, including the teacher who was just frozen there, standing there, looking at me, me looking at him, eye to eye. So, like grade 6, so this is my first act of rebellion. This is, my first public act of rebellion there. And the teacher, just ignored, me. And I didn't know what else to say. I should have, made a speech or something. But anyway, I just sat down quietly, politely. And, things went on, until we had a fight at the end of the year when I threw a rubber ball to the teacher. I missed, but he got angry and he picked up the ball and started chasing me with it and ran me down and hit me in the back, with the rubber ball.
Abusive little wanker. I mean, he had it coming. He was the one who was being the prick. He deserved the ball to be thrown at him.
Yeah.
And I mean, at the end of the day, the way you stood up, nonetheless, the fact he was so flabbergasted he didn't get you sent straight for a caning is a victory in and of itself.
Oh, yeah.
Also, you kind of see the two differences between like the way the British do anti-Semitism and then the US's weird Judeo-Christianity anti-Semitism, where the Christians have two different ways. Yeah, we're just anti-Semitic. We'll try and virtue signal now since World War II, but we were very clear up until about the 40s on like being completely anti-Jewish and wanting them all out of our country and being very open about that. And so the Protestant sect, even though it basically is just its own brand of Catholicism of England, is a much more openly anti-Semitic than what the Americans devise, where their anti-Semitism is more centered around Christians, utilizing the fact that, part of the Abrahamic faith, so we're Judeo-Christians now, we really respect our Jewish heritage, and they don't. What they do is they push for this very specific idea of what a Jewish person should attenuate as, and that is as a Christian that calls himself a Jew. Ben Shapiro, basically.
Oh my, yes. Yeah, it's so comical and tragic at the same time. But yeah, I was there. And like I was raised socialist and Bundist, so I never had any illusions about Zionism or capitalism, like socialism was it, that was all there was, to say, it was obvious, that we had to be socialists. And then, my mother, my mother was a Bundist, like she didn't, come out as a Bundist, none of the refugees, would come out as a Bundist or, criticize Zionism for its treatment of the Palestinians because they were afraid. Because, there were a few of us, and the Canadian Jewish community, which was generally pro-Zionist, was, they would have ostracized, anybody, who made any public statements to that effect. And in fact, that's what happened to me. And death threats and physical menacing, when we were demonstrating and that sort of thing. So, but my mother and I, we were like a secret collaborators. And even though they tried to sort of instill us with certain Zionist, ideology in the Cheder, in the Jewish Hebrew school. No, it wasn't a Hebrew school. It was a Talmud Torah. So it was teaching a Yiddish as an oral language, but we studied, the text, translating from Hebrew into English over a period of 7 years, an evening school that I went to in addition to the public Protestant school during the daytime. Yeah. And So I don't have any sort of transition story to give to you, like most other, Jewish anti-Zionists, say, oh, they were raised Zionists and they became anti-Zionists because of this or that, like the 1982 Sabra Shatila massacre, which was a turning point for a lot of people. And for the Communist Party, the turning point was 1967. Before that, they were pro-Zionist. Then after, they were just two-staters, two-state solution people. So,
which is not much better than being a supporter of Zionism.
yeah, which is not much better. So,
what is it? Apathy leads to fascism.
yeah, yeah.
And it's something I somewhat envy because I mean, in my own tackles with politics, I was far right for a long period of my life, and then I ended up having my entire world torn out of my arsehole inside and out. It's the best way I can express it. It's like the whole thing with Marx and Hegel is Hegel on his head inside out. I had that happen to me, and had to reconstruct the way I looked at the world. Entirely, and I had because it was a big cataclysmic effect I had off of a weird trip I ended up having with LSD. Well, acid, not LSD, but everyone calls all those forms of acid LSD. But basically, I was already having experiences that were knocking off my racism, were discounting the way I was believing, and then I took this trippies, and I didn't even take that much. It was just towards the end of the night I started contemplating about who I am. And because of time dilation occurs when you're on trippies, because it's like being in a dream state. I went through like who I am as a person in a very extensive manner, and my mind basically just like locked the key away. You ain't feeling like that anymore. You ain't connecting with that anymore. That's evil. You know, I was really distraught. I was really upset at the time when it was happening. I fell asleep. I woke up the next morning and I just didn't feel the same person. Everything I was engaging with felt like I'd never done it before, but I could remember how many times I'd done it, be walking through places I hadn't walked. I'd walked through a million times, but it felt like I'd never been there before. And so I had to rebuild the way I perceived every one of my experiences.
Yeah. Yeah, acid will do that, because before, like people are just accustomed to operating on believing, the accumulation of information that they've been fed, previously. But they've never sort of, taken the time to analyze it, never been taught how to analyze it, never been taught how to think, and never taught how to be independent in thought. So, like an acid, if you've got the prerequisites, acid will teach you how to do all that. And then you look at yourself, and, from a perspective that's, I don't know where it is, but it's something that you can do, for yourself. You can actually look at yourself and know yourself by yourself. It's sort of an interesting phenomena. And so you can see, what you are sort of, trained to be, modeled to be, and then you can decide, what you want to be.
And it has that moment, Terry, because it comes with very specific conditions. Because there was also a problem with I have where I've had to go at trippers, where it's like you can't treat it as like now we should do it every 2 weeks kind of thing, guys. It's like I've done it once. I don't think I need to do it again. I'm glad with the results I got. But yeah, no, it's that like third perspective moment that I had with it. It was like I was auditing over someone else, and so I had no like none of my biases of it being about myself allowed me to stop from castigating myself and tearing myself apart. And because of the dilation effect of the REM motions going on in your brain at that point, you've got a lot of time to contemplate on it without the time needing to be a lot of time.
Well, my big transition was like that grade 6 experience, where I knew what I was, but I was afraid to be it, in public. Afraid to, fear is the most sort of, like dominant sort of factor of being a second generation Holocaust survivor. But I'm conscious of the fear and I can overcome it. So, and I did spontaneously at that time in grade 6. But since then, even then, it's always a struggle, to come out with your identity and with your own thoughts. It's something that takes like a little revolution in and of yourself, inside of yourself. Yeah.
I'm going through that now with transition.
Okay, so what's the next question?
Oh, my mouse is right clicked, I can't see. How did these experiences growing up enforce your political developments as you grew from a young rebellious lad into a radical and rebellious man? And how did your impoverished upbringing advance these developments?
Yeah, well, one thing that was a constant feature of when I was a teenager was that on Saturday, like until I was not a teenager, but pre-teenage, until 14, I was Orthodox. Oh, yes, this is a transition that I should speak about. Because, I was raised Orthodox, modern Orthodox. And I on Saturdays, I wouldn't go to play sports or something, like that. You're supposed to, I didn't know, there were a lot of things that you could not do. And so I would go to the library and read books. So every Saturday I'd go in and I'd read, and that's how I taught myself a more sophisticated English, and how I developed a certain precision and method of study that was forever useful. So, and then I wouldn't even, like take the streetcar, the electric train in the city at the time. I would walk there because, you weren't supposed to use anything, motorized on Saturday, Shabbos, so I'd walk, a few kilometers, get down to the library, stay there all day and forget, that I was reading it, even after supper time. One time my mother had to call up the library and ask the librarian to call me to come home to eat supper,
That's brilliant.
Yeah. So that was, one way, like the library, was one way I broke out of my isolation and at the age of 14, when I had the right to be an adult and think like an adult after my bar mitzvah, well, then I examined, what my context was, which was the Holocaust, and, considered that relying upon a deity to take care of you in a time of crisis, is not the way to go because it didn't work. So, that's what everybody sort of realized, all of the, survivors. And we never talked about, like any sort of, critical or doubtful sort of, impressions about religion per se. We just sort of left it aside, it wasn't important enough. And we didn't want to sort of, have to contend with our own upbringing and because, we were sort of trying to find, another way to be Jewish, because, a religious way to be Jewish, wasn't good enough. So the Bundist, thought was neutral in the question of religion. So it took care of that and turned it into a question that wasn't a question anymore because it wasn't a question that could be answered. So we just, left it aside. But it was the political identity that was very important for us. And we weren't allowed to express it within the Jewish community. And nobody outside of the Jewish community, wanted to know what our political positions were and didn't even want to know, whether or not we existed. It was just the Holocaust was over, forget about it, for everybody else. And for us, well, it was a matter of something that we wanted to be recognized, but we weren't allowed to have it recognized because first of all, people didn't want to upset anybody else, by talking about the Holocaust and putting them on spot, to either account for it or to regret it or to apologize for it because they didn't do anything, like the Canadian Jewish community did nothing to help, like the Jewish people of Europe, to fight the Holocaust. All they were concerned about was getting, Jewish refugees into Palestine after the war, because they were pro-Zionist. So that's where they belong. And besides, they didn't want us here in Canada because we spoke Yiddish and we sort of, tended to fit into a stereotype of what the English Canadians thought we were. And they didn't want to be thought of in that way. They wanted to be thought of as Canadians and first and not Jewish first. So, they didn't welcome us very well, even within our own family. So, that's the way it was. And that's the way it still is, actually.
Yeah, it's absolutely mental because like there's basically the two ways that it goes about it with anti-Semitism. You're either despised by the non-Jewish people who will either blatantly try and suggest that Jewish people are on a pedestal, which is wrong. Or secondly, you'll get the virtue signalers. They'll virtue signal about how much they hate the fact that Mr. Hitler went on a crusade against the Jews, when actually they're not bothered about that. What they're bothered about is that Hitler went and invaded them in the same way they invade everyone else. That's the big problem that Europe has with the Nazis. They don't have a problem with their massacre of the Roma, the Jews, the
Yeah,
disabled, the Slavs, and many other millions of people. They don't give a shit about that.
yeah.
Like, and then you got the other side of the fence, Jewish or not Jewish, where you have there's the pro-Zionists and the pro-Zionists. If you're a Jewish person who is incredibly Westernized, in Western Europeanized, where you are more, you have more of a social relationship with whiteness than you do with your own Jewish heritage,
Mm.
then
Mm.
you know you're acceptable and wanted in these Western regions. They're not too bothered about shipping you off to Israel. But if you see all the way from the Balfour Declaration at the turn of 1917, the Anglosphere's mentality has been as if you're what they perceive as stereotypically Jewish, they want you on a boat straight to Palestine.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, well, yeah. I mean, the Zionist plan for the Jewish people was first published in a work in 1835 in England, where it was thought of as a colonial strategy and a way to take care of the Jewish problem or the Jewish question, as it's more politely termed in classical Marxist theory. But
I've heard about that book.
yeah, yeah. Um, it's it's difficult, but I don't know. You know, it's still difficult. It's still so difficult, you know, to get a hearing, you know, for the Jewish Bundesposition. And it's not only because of the ideological boycott by the Zionists, but it's the ideological boycott by most Marxist tendencies as well. You know, even in the Trotskyist movement, which I experienced for 7 years, from 66, oh, it's longer, 66 to 76, there was no recognition of Jewish people as such, as a people. It was only considered to be a religion. And if you made any allusion to Jewishness, you know, you were immediately suspected of being, you know, like a closet religious person, you know. At one time, a comrade, you know, who's a Holocaust, a second generation Holocaust survivor as well, became a lawyer, Harry Capito. You know, one time, you know, when he was frustrated with the Trotskyist comrades in a branch meeting, and he said, "Oh God, can't you see?" You know, something like that. Then this other guy, Ian Angus, gets up and says, "Oh, you refer to God. You cannot do that here." And you know, like you have no right to do that here, you know, as if, you know, he meant it. You know, it's the only way he could contest his, you know, like position. And this is, you know, how they do it. And then there's the philo-Semitic position in which, oh yes, Jews are wonderful, da 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 da. We want to be Jews, you know, but we call ourselves Christians and all this sort of thing, you know. And we're the real Jews now, you know, because we carry on tradition, you know, of whatever. And
The Christians are the modern Jews. That's the Mormons straight up.
yeah, Judeo-Christianity, you know, all of a sudden is some sort of a doctrine that I've never heard of it before, you know. And who teaches us about this doctrine of Judeo-Christianity? Well, it's the Protestants, you know. Like, did the Jewish people ever
Trustworthy
agree to this?
source.
You know, like, no, did they, you know, like even one Jewish person even agree to this? No, not necessarily. You know, like,
No, what in 1870 something, they found themselves an atheist Zionist, and they got him to agree with them. So it's okay, guys. Don't worry about it.
yeah, yeah. Netanyahu's there, you know, like he's the bridge of Judeo-Christianity, he's even an American, to boot. And there he is, now with this, what kind of government is it that they have now there? It's, neo-fascist or theo-fascist or...
They've been around that long. They're just the old fascists from before.
It's the old fascists from 48, yeah. Oh my.
And I mean, the fact Netanyahu's back is just, that's the most absurd thing that's happened in the last like 6 or 7 months for me. Is just like,
Yeah.
how? Because I the only reason that they could be bringing him back in is just because because I remember speaking to I was speaking to a Marxist Leninist who lives in Israel, and he was telling me about how the civil society in Israel, the public civil society, is more fascistic than the government. Like they want an all-out like bloodier war than even the government could satisfy themselves with. Um, and so it's quite likely that that very fascistic civil society is cause for the push of the return of Netanyahu. I mean, Netanyahu was basically offed by the bourgeoisie for someone else. Like they picked outright to go the other way. The fact he's back is like the fact that Trump or DeSantis is likely going to take over in America next year. Like it's the rise of fascism.
Yeah. It shows as well, the dead end of the Zionist ideology, because they have nowhere to go. They're just repeating what they had before, only worse. So now they have Smoltich, is now the head of the West Bank, as a second minister of defense. And he's in charge of the civil administration of the West Bank. And so it's not under the military occupation control anymore. It is more so under the control of civil administration, which means that they have, de facto annexed the West Bank, to the state of Israel.
Yeah.
But, they don't say they're doing it, but they're doing it.
It's frontier culture. I mean, this is like that famous quote from I can't remember which U.S. Secretary of State, but he went and visited Afol al-Assad, and he turned around to him and went, "The Israelis look at you the same way we look at Indians."
Oh, yeah.
And it's such a perfect expression. I mean, to the point where there have been British politicians, I think it was last year or the year before, that were like, gosh, shocked the settler program that's going on in Israel. For those dickheads to even be mentioning it, and like, good on you for being pissed about it 70 years later. Like, fucking someone's late to the party. But like, the fact that even they're going to a point where they're like, oh my God, this is fucking mental, it's going to cause fucking problems, shows that it's not just like bad in the sense of they're doing terrible things. They're like at the extent that the other people who also do all these terrible things are like, that might be a bit too far.
Oh, it goes further than that, they have a plan. This government has a plan to annex the West Bank, in more than a preliminary fashion like they're doing now. And they intend to declare the Palestinians there as alien residents. Okay, so they don't have to give them a citizenship and they don't have to give them a vote, but they're going to annex the territory. And probably more than just Sector C, which is 70%, but they're going to take and then even, Sector A, the municipalities, they're invading them with the military during the day to go and arrest people. They just killed, 8 people in Nablus the other day, while doing so. They just consider it right, to stomp on, anything, anywhere, anytime. So that's one thing. Another thing is that, in theocratic, like Zionism, there is something called, in Hebrew, a melchuma mitzvah, okay? In Islam, this is called a jihad or holy war. In English, Christianity, this is called a crusade. And this is what they're doing. They're into doing a holy war against the Palestinian people to expel them or to ghettoize them, basically. And this is a policy of ghettoization and expulsion. And anybody convicted of anything, under the Zionist judiciary will now be declared, suitable for expulsion. They can expel anybody they can convict of a certain sort of, crime that they make up, of course, with secret evidence to boot. So,
You
this
just
is,
have to be on their radar, and they'll just make shit up and fuck you out.
yeah.
And with the ghettoization, like a lot of people would a lot of people must look at the big comparisons that link a lot of countries up in regards to the ghettoization of colonized peoples. A
Yeah.
lot of people would very rightly link it up to America and its ghettoization of the black community. Absolutely correct. But I think there is a better example that is linked to both of these, that isn't any less important than America as an example in here. But I would say Poland, World War II, perfect example of it.
Poland, yeah, is now presently a Christian nation state. I applied to have my citizenship recognized, because my parents are from Poland and they were Polish. They even spoke Polish to each other. So I applied, and they put me off for 3-4 years now. And then finally the governor of Warsaw said, oh, you can't, you have to prove that your parents were citizens, but I've proved already that my parents were born in Poland. I even have the family register, from the town, for the birth of my father, handwritten. And no, they don't accept that my parents were citizens. They say, produce a passport. They say, house, like Jewish people under Nazi occupation supposed to obtain a passport, to leave. They just
go down to the Nazi office.
Yeah,
make sure to wear your Star of David, and then go ask the Nazis if you could have a passport, because they'll definitely let you go travel to anywhere that's not in their control.
Yeah, no, but at that point, after the military occupation by the Nazis, Jewish people weren't allowed to escape. They were meant for, elimination, extermination. It was a conscious strategy. It wasn't, default, of illness and overwork or anything like that, which was also the case, but it was a policy strategy, of complete extermination. And the Westminster Conference, for which there is a film about, which follows the actual text of the minutes of the meeting, which was kept by a stenographer, with all the wording, enunciated by each of the delegates, that they actually said at the time, was that they were extending, the Nuremberg laws, not only eliminate and exterminate the children of Jewish parents, but also those who were descended from one Jewish grandparent. This was in addition, and it wasn't even legal, but they just adopted it just as such. The lawyer who actually formulated the Nuremberg, laws objected to this, but he conceded and adopted, unanimously, the plan to exterminate all of the Jewish people, including those who didn't even consider themselves to be Jewish anymore.
Also, the having one Jewish grandparent is kind of funny, because Hitler had one Jewish grandparent. So
maybe.
Yeah, I know it's not fully
substantiated,
substantiated, but it comes from his mother's side, somewhere on that side of the family. It's just kind of one of those moments of like weird hypocrisy. And there's so many stories about because the West tried to make up loads of stories. Why does Hitler hate the Jews? Was it his mother dying or something like that? And it's like, do they know what country he's in? Like, there was a long history of anti-Semitism there. He didn't need to have like a life tragedy of and of himself to become a ideological anti-Semite.
Yeah.
Hitler wasn't the one in 1916, before the war was even over, that decided to preach stab in the back about the Jewish people in Germany, because a lot of Jewish people were pacifists.
Yes, and, not only that, they were revolutionaries. The Jewish, German Jewish, milieu were amongst the, leaders, of the German Revolution of 1918. First of all, in Berlin, there was Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. Okay.
Yep.
They were even killed by the Social Democrats. The populist anti-Semitism was so strong that even the Social Democrats, acted on it and used it, in order to stop Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht there. In Bavaria,
Social Democrats are the moderate wing of fascism.
Could be. They can be, yes. And then in Bavaria, there was another revolution. There were two revolutions in Germany at the time in 1918, anti-war revolutions. But the second one is not very well known.
Republic.
That's it, yes. And that was a coalition between the left Social Democrats and an anarchist, Adler, who was also killed, assassinated by the counter-revolution.
A lot of the leaders of the...
and he was Jewish, of course. So, it was the Jewish people who tried to stop the war, stop the Germans from being killed, needlessly in an inter-imperialist war. and then they were blamed, for Germany's defeat because they didn't, like they supposedly would have won the war against France and England if, the German workers were entirely 100% behind, the war. Okay, well, maybe, but so what? Like why continue a war, that was destroying yourself and everybody else? It was, but that was the logic, that Hitler came up with. Yeah, you're right.
I mean, also the KPD was also predominantly Jewish when it arose in 1920.
Probably
I
a lot,
1919.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean very much. I don't think. Yeah, like my father was put into jail in Russia, by a Jewish woman communist, because they'd missed a day of work. Being Jewish, and in the Communist Party, was not something to be, proud of the record for which, they were operating. But, in that case, they were blamed for doing that which was in the interest of the German working class. And this was turned into a nationalistic crusade against the Jewish people, as if, they were responsible for declaring the war in the first place, which was, of course, the Kaiser. So
I've heard anti-Semites try and claim that, no, the Germans were fighting against the Jewish bourgeoisie with the German working class.
yeah. And then, no, it goes on and on and on, this whole thing, this whole conspiracy theory, because,
How
Second
big
World War,
can you pile up your tower of bullshit?
yeah. And then the Second World War was supposed to have been caused by not the Jewish communists this time. It was the Jewish bankers, who caused, the Second World War. I don't know how, but somehow, I've heard that, so many times. Okay. So let's see now. We have just a few minutes left before the Zoom deadline of 40 minutes, so let's get into some conclusion here. And what would be your conclusion as to what we're about?
So, like, what's it? We'll have more and increased conversations expressing a lot of these things as we go forth. The way I'll apply a conclusion here as to what we're about, what this discussion's been about, is, a lot of comrades don't know enough about yourself, and in these moments get to see a lot of the imagery, a lot of the history that goes into your struggles as a second generation Holocaust survivor, and the intensity that that brings to someone's livelihood on the scope of revolutionary activity. Why, so many of the Jewish community found themselves being socialists and communists, respectively, at the end of the Second World War, and how that compounded, how that history of their parents' experiences, of your parents' experiences, compounded, affected, and developed you as a radical, as a revolutionary, as a experienced man of struggle. I would say, what advice would you have for young comrades that are trying to ascertain towards political activism or revolutionary work?
It's difficult.